Rosleigh, have you heard the news today about what's happened at the Sydney airport? The corruption there.
Yes, I have.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, I wasn't surprised. We've been asking for nearly 9 years, or going on 9 years now, to investigate more. We want more investigation in the corruption that is at the airports.
Well, let's get more on these allegations that customs officers at Sydney Airport have allowed millions of dollars worth of drugs into the country. Our reporter Claire Aird is at Sydney Airport. Claire, good morning. Take us through these allegations.
Good morning, Karina. Well, this is an ABC, a joint ABC 7:30 Fairfax investigation. It's alleged that a group of at least 15 customs officials have been involved with organised drug figures for the past several years. Now, it's alleged that this group helped facilitate the movement of drugs and illicit money through this terminal, this international terminal here at Sydney Airport. It's also alleged that they were involved in the manufacturing of drugs as well. And earlier this year, police found cocaine and pseudoephedrine in an apartment in Sydney, and it's alleged that this was helped through the Sydney International Terminal by customs officials. It's also alleged that these drugs came in no small quantities, that sources say that there were backpacks and suitcases that were helped through those security checkpoints by customs officials. Now, 12 months ago, Australia's top anti-corruption agency, the Commission for Law Enforcement and Integrity, turned cameras onto these customs officials. So far, 2 people have been charged with corruption, bribery and drug importation, Karina.
So, Claire, were there any warnings this was happening?
Yeah, Karina, look, it's understood that back in 2007, a top-ranking customs official was urging that more anti-corruption officials needed to be put here at the Sydney International Terminal. He also said that these staff needed to be double, and he warned that the agency was terribly exposed. Now, customs spokespeople haven't said anything this morning. They say they can't, but the Australian Federal Police say that they'll be holding a press conference later on this morning.
The day that Schapelle flew out, there was some issues with you trying to get footage of Schapelle the time that she flew out. In the newspaper article that's out, there's mention of cameras being tampered with even in, like 8 years on. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, for the 3 airports Schapelle went through that day, not one bit of footage. Now, why? And each time we asked for footage, we got a different answer. And why? And no one has ever answered our questions. Why wasn't there any footage? In Brisbane, Sydney domestic plus international, and then Indonesia airport. They've all got cameras up, but why didn't we get any footage? Not even of Schapelle walking around the Sydney airport, international airport. Not even of Schapelle going through customs in Sydney airport. Not even booking in when she gets to Sydney.
Yeah. And you actually had a Member of Parliament, John Murphy. He took up the challenge to try and find the footage, didn't he, from the airport? How did he go?
Yes, well, as far as I gather, he was going to Parliament and asking questions. None of his questions got answered, so he looked into it himself. And the cameras that would have showed Schapelle's bag getting unloaded from Brisbane Airport and getting loaded to the other plane that was taking her to Denpasar in Bali. Well, those cameras that would have showed the luggage getting unloaded was turned away from where they should have been.
So they're actually turned away from the actual baggage makeup areas.
Yes.
Right, that's what he found.
And if they were in place, their proper place, we would have had some footage, but they were turned away.
Yeah, and at the time you found out that something else was going on at the airport. There was another incident occurring the day that Schapelle flew.
Yes, there was supposed to be a big operation going on with a really big drug bust. And that's another reason why wasn't all the cameras in place and all working and kept for legal reasons. But as we were asking for footage again, we got answers. Oh no, they're taped over. Why? You wouldn't tape over them. And not only that, it was all over the media, everywhere, that there was an Australian girl in Bali being arrested. Naturally, you'd go, oh, well, she left from Brisbane Airport and then Sydney Airport. You wouldn't tape over, you'd keep it for legal reasons.
And none of that footage is ever...
Nothing. They've never given us any footage.
And what do you think will happen now?
Well, investigations will be done, but the thing is, people are getting found out that they're corrupt and they're working at airports.
Well, more arrests are likely in the unfolding customs corruption scandal, with allegations at least 20 Australian customs officers were involved in a major drug importation cell. It's an explosive twist in the case of Schapelle Corby, who has always claimed she's innocent and that drugs found in her boogie board bag were planted, possibly by baggage handlers. For more, we're joined by journalist and author of Snowing in Bali, Catherine Bonella. Catherine, good morning to you. Could Schapelle have been a victim this whole time?
Absolutely. It's what she said and her family have said from day one, that someone else put it in her bag. And they've said there's been corruption at the airport. They've had reports and so on since she was arrested in 2004.
Catherine, a police task force is now targeting the alleged culture of corruption within Australian airports. I mean, from your research, can you tell us how deeply rooted is this problem?
Well, Alan Kessing, who was a customs officer and then analyst, actually wrote a report in 2002 and 2003 saying it was endemic back then. And he's come out now too saying that, you know, there's been corruption in the airports for more than 10 years.
You have been quite close to the Corbys throughout their whole nightmare. Have you spoken to the family since this news broke?
I have, yes.
And what have they had to say to you?
Basically, they're saying it's nothing that we, haven't been saying for the last 8 years since Schapelle was arrested, that there's endemic corruption in the airports. And, it's good this is coming out because it gives weight and credence to sort of what we've been saying. And, the fact is that there's documentation sort of showing this from, the police task force back in 2002 and 2003, like Burlap and Tempest and Mocha. These were all looking at airport staff involved in domestic transport of drugs in Australia and helping bring drugs through the international airport and out into Australia. So they've known about this for a long time, and they've got a lot of FOI documents sort of supporting that there's been, long-term corruption at Sydney Airport.
On hearing of the arrests, Schapelle's sister Mercedes said, and I quote, "We have suspected for a long time that Schapelle is a victim of this endemic airport crime, and this news only goes further to confirm that."
No, but they've known now for some time, through an FOI document, that her bag, her boogie board bag, was the only bag on that flight going to Indonesia that was not screened, despite it being law to screen all bags. So they've known all this stuff for some time now.
So I suppose this comes as vindication then for her family.
Yeah, I think, well, in a way, yeah. I mean, the fact is that she's still in jail and she's lost 8 years of her life. And from day one, she's sort of screamed her innocence, and she hasn't stopped, screaming her innocence, and neither has her family. And, so it's good news that this has come out now. and it's being exposed, and it definitely does give more credence to what they've been saying. You know, a lot of people have dismissed it as garbage, but now, you know, again, this did all come out at the time, obviously, with all the police reports and so on. So it's just, you know, coming out again. It's definitely good for her.
It will be very interesting to see how this all plays out. Catherine Bonella, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We do appreciate it. Over to you, Steve.
Pleasure.
If anybody ever has any doubt of Schapelle, you know, Schapelle's innocent, and if you thought for a moment she's guilty, well, think again. This has to put a doubt in your mind. And I think it's up to our government to speak to Indonesian government authorities there and just bring Schapelle home. The people power of Australia, we were bringing Schapelle home. The people were looking after their own. But with Mick Kelty, Chris Ellison and Downer, they started the smear campaign because they just wanted to look after the airports. They didn't give another thought of Schapelle. They just wanted to make her out to look guilty, so they started a smear campaign against the whole family.
And through years of investigating, especially with Mercedes with her FOI applications, she was able to uncover letters, especially one particular letter from Maximal Wilton that actually said that Schapelle's bag had been tampered with. That letter came to light only a couple of years ago, yet they were aware of this and they never told you.
No, yes, Mick Kelty and Chris Ellison were aware of this. We have letters corresponding to each other of Mick Ellison and Mick Kelty, and they're saying, oh, well, this means the bag could have been interfered with. Excuse me, it was interfered with. And you know quite well it was.
And how important would that have been at the time that Schapelle was going through court?
Well, very, very important. And Mick Kelty, the AFP, he was there saying there's no corruption in our airport, there's no drug trafficking in our airports.
Yeah, all the newspaper reports a week before Schapelle got convicted proved otherwise, didn't it?
Definitely, yes. Yeah. And even to this very day, there's been the people jailed for corruption, drugs. They've just, what's happened to Schapelle, no one in the government and officials wanted to know. All they did is want to keep our airports with the tourists coming in, making dollars, and swept everything else under the carpet. They did not want Schapelle to have a voice either, and they don't want Schapelle home because Schapelle will have her voice.
So you feel that they prefer to have her stay in Indonesia than bring her home?
That's what I feel.
Yeah.
Yes. Because there's just been so much. You know, they started the smear campaign. They let it keep going. Just so much. And while Schapelle was going through court, government people like Mick Kelty, Alexander Downer, they were all talking on television about Schapelle and the family, and it was all nonsense what they were saying. They started the smear campaign because they were protecting their airports, their corrupt airports.
So what do you have to say to them now that it's actually come out and it's been said that this is probably one of the worst corrupt cases to have come to light at Sydney Airport in a decade?
Well, we've been saying and asking for Mick Kelty to be investigated. All the time we have been saying. And why would they come out and say lies on television, straight out lies? on TV when Schapelle was going through court in Indonesia.
Well, you can't do that in Australia, can you?
No, but even in some cases now, if they're asked an opinion or something, they say, oh no, it's going through court proceedings.
Can't have an opinion.
Yeah,
It's
but they didn't mind smearing Schapelle and her family.
Do you think that's because the case was actually being held overseas? They felt comfortable?
No, I just think it was, they just wanted Schapelle to look guilty to the people because the people power was working. They were demanding Schapelle to come home because the people knew something was wrong. And then, with the smear campaign, Mick Kelty, the government, the Labor Howard government, smear campaign to look after their airports, they just put out nonsense about Schapelle and the family, and they think and they do treat the people of Australia like sheep. And most of the people in Australia hear and read and believe it, and they don't use their brain to think, hey, what? Nah, that couldn't be, and think about things. But there's a lot of people out there that do think and did their own investigation, and they know Schapelle is innocent.
Yeah. And most of the information that can be found where, Rosie?
On the Expendable. So if anybody wants to question or look up anything, we have papers, government papers from Freedom of Information. The letters are there, the correspondence letters from Mick Kelty and Chris Ellison. So many files are there, and you can look them up. Ask questions on the Expendable.
And what do you want to tell our government now, Rosleigh?
Bring Schapelle home. Do your job and look after your own, and bring Schapelle home. The innocent should be brought home.